On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player reviews. And on today's episode, we close out the last remaining players with our friend, Andrei Vasilevskiy. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player reviews. We're into the final stretch of players, and today we're taking a look at Andrei Vasilevskiy, his season, year 10 in the books. We talk about the prospect of next season. Is he back? And when we say back, we obviously mean Vezina trophy winning Andrei Vasilevskiy, as well as how we round out every player review. We talk about expectations. But before we grab any of those topics, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, subscribe to our channel there. Drop a comment below. How did you feel about Andrei Vasilevskiy's 2023-24 season? So, just a recap for maybe some of you that may not remember or may not, are just joining us for the first time. And if you are, welcome to Bolts Nation. So on the beginning of the year, obviously there was a lot of, there was a lot of question marks heading into this season for personnel for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then we got word, I believe it was around late August, that Andrei Vasilevskiy was getting back surgery and he was going to miss the first 2 months of the season, which he didn't come back until the day after Thanksgiving. And it was at that time, honestly, and I still believe this to this day, that, they said at the time that his ailment was due to something he did, working out in the offseason or whatever the case may be. I honestly believe it was something that has been bothering him pretty much since probably maybe even during since their loss in the Stanley Cup final to Colorado and throughout the course of the following season. A lot of people blamed his lack of performance or lack of really the lower level of his game due to fatigue, which, yes, a lot of players on this team, including himself, that's an absolutely, legitimate reason for why the Lightning were not as good after, 3 straight Stanley Cup final appearances. But the subsequent back injury and just the way he just seemed off throughout that whole season in 22-23, you didn't see the same guy in net, and it wasn't fatigue. And then, so fast forward through the injury, he gets the surgery. Jonas Johansson fills in a net for him, and if you want to go listen to our player review on him, we did one, I think, maybe a couple of weeks ago or so. Go ahead and check that out. That was a good episode. I always like talking about some of the unsung heroes on this team, and he was definitely one of them to start the season in a time where really there wasn't really that many other than Nikita Kucherov and a few handful of players. And so he comes back the day after Thanksgiving. His first matchup is against Carolina, not an easy foe. And at the time, I didn't really think that any of us really knew what the expectations were going to be for Andrei Vasilevskiy, even with the 2 months off. And that was really the only thing that we could really have held our head or our hats on really at that time was we don't really know what we're going to get out of this guy. From all accounts, it wasn't exactly an invasive surgery. It wasn't like he was having any kind of reconstructive thing that would have been eventually inhibited his movement or kind of would have, I don't know, he would have maybe would have played with kind of some sort of, fear that he was going to re-injure it. There was never any of that. And so, but still at the time, especially in hockey, when a guy comes back from an injury and you don't really know what it was, and especially it's a surgery, and anytime it's a back injury, I don't care what sport. I mean, we've all hurt our backs. We know how long it takes, surgery or not, to heal it. And really, it really does affect everything else in your movements and just, all that other stuff. And that was the thing. That was the big question mark at the time. Comes back, has a decent game against Carolina. Lightning win that one 8-2. That was mainly just Carolina being bad that night. I mean, Vasilevskiy played well. Saved 22 of 24 shots that he faced that night. And then, from then on, and I spoke about this in my piece on Bolts by the Bay, I actually posted it and put it out a little earlier before we start recording this podcast, so go ahead and check that out. I'm going to try and post articles that kind of sometimes correspond with the episodes that we're putting out, so go ahead and check that out, boltsbythebay.com. And it seemed as though, we all had excitement and from that performance, and like I said, it wasn't like crazy highlight worthy kind of game. It was just made the saves where he needed to make them for the most part, and that was pretty much it. And the Lightning really did the rest that night. And then from then on, so that even makes kind of the subsequent performances later on in the season kind of not all that big of a letdown, because it's kind of more so, in my opinion, a continuance of what we had the year before. The numbers might have been a little bit different, but at the same time, if you watch the games, you saw the performances, it was one of those things where there was something missing. And you had goals that he let up throughout the course of the season that we could always all agree on, I think, that really there was some there that really he should have saved. And that was kind of the thing that always worried me throughout the course of this season, is that, well, he's not playing bad and he's not playing particularly well, but so we could live with that, but he's giving up goals here and there that come playoff time, he cannot afford to give those up. And that was the big thing for me, and I think for a lot of Lightning fans throughout the course of the season, how we were cautiously optimistic and while also simultaneously being uneasy about what might have been on the horizon for Andrei Vasilevskiy come playoff time. Because really, I think that's the mindset a lot of us Lightning fans and people that watch and follow the team on a nightly basis is it's not so much how you do in the regular season. We always have our eyes kind of one fixated on the season and the other kind of looking at what and how the playoffs are going to shape up for each player. And that was really something for me that really I if you followed us all season long, I was actively worrying about that whenever I spoke about Andrei Vasilevskiy. But nonetheless, his stats were pretty good, all things considered. And you take the time that he missed, at the end of the day, he really just played the amount of games that you kind of would have figured that he were to play regardless of the injury, because it was very well known going into this past season that really John Cooper needed to kind of manage his games, really kind of try to figure out how much was too much and how little was too little for him. And I think really for any number one goaltender, that's really the main battle that I think the head coach really wrestles with on a night-to-night basis. But he played 52 games, started all of those, 130. He had a record of 30, 20, and 2. His save percentage was .900. His goals against average was .290. And he had 2 shutouts, which was the big thing there as well. He became the 16th goaltender in NHL history to record his 7th 30-win season. So that was something that I don't remember anyone really talking about that. I'm sure it was mentioned at some point. But that was something that I really think that kind of flew under the radar. And I think that, you know, if you're just measuring him by his regular season, and I think for the most part through these reviews, I've been trying to really talk about a player and evaluate their season based on not only the regular season, but also the playoffs, which may not be fair depending on, you know, who we're talking about. But with him, I really thought that until I realized that stat when I was going back over his stats and kind of everything that went on the season, you know, that's something that's pretty significant. And I think that we'll look back on the 23-24 season, regular season, just for Andrei Vasilevskiy and say, yeah, he started off with an injury. He came into the NHL. He played at the NHL level. He had his debut where kind of a lot of players were already ready and you know, past the point of figuring things out. They were in midseason form. And he kind of just weathered the storm that was ahead of him at times. And really, you know, yeah, it may have taken a little bit longer for him to figure it out. But at the end of the year, he really did. He really came into form, and it was really part of it was, you know, he made some significant, whatever you want to call it. I mean, he really kind of, I wouldn't say set a record. I don't think that's the right way of putting it, but he made a historical step forward, I guess we could say, in terms of goaltender statistics. And if you look at the names in front of him, I think for all of them except Pekka Rinne, I think they're all Hall of Famers for the most part, or future Hall of Famers. Pekka Rinne, I think, is borderline. But really, the point is here is that I thought that, and I talk about it in my article for a little bit, where I hint at it, is that this was a really important season for him. I think to really prove, or once again prove, that he still has it. And we'll talk about that more in the second segment, because how he played in that playoff series against the Florida Panthers, regardless of the outcome, the fact that they were knocked out in the first round, I think that was really important for him. And I really think that was more so important for the team, especially when you're talking and thinking about this upcoming season, 24-25. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about Vazzy's season. I'm going to give him a grade of a B+. And A, I think, you know, maybe we would have seen the stats a little better, his play just a tad bit better. But yeah, I just can't give him an A, because I didn't feel like he was dominant. He played just well enough to help out, especially in the month of March, but I didn't think he played great to where he was one of the top goaltenders in the league. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about, or felt about, Andrei Vasilevskiy's season. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about, is he back? Is he back to his prime form? Is he back to the goaltender that we all knew him to be when he was winning the Vezina trophy and Conn Smythes and all about that? We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Policygenius. Now, a lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. Now, Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs, but Policygenius, remember, they are looking out for you because they have no incentive to recommend one insurer over the other. So you could just trust their guidance. So get the peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form, we're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Drop a comment below. Hit that notification button on any platform, so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. And if you want to follow more of my work, you go ahead and over to boltbythebay.com. Like I said before, I wrote an article about him tonight, and I will be attempting in the future, as I've loosely have throughout this offseason, writing articles on there that correspond with the episodes that are being put out or published that day. So you definitely want to check that out. So the thing that when we're talking about Vasilevskiy's season that I think will stand out to all of us, is not necessarily how it started, but more so how it ended, and that was in the playoffs against the Florida Panthers. We all know what happens there. The Lightning losing 5. This was just a kind of a fight that I think a lot of Lightning fans, especially going into the series, especially with how the season ended, kind of felt like this team wasn't the same team that was the best team in the NHL in March. Kind of seems as I think the general consensus now, whether it was hindsight then or even going into that series, that this team kind of mentally, for the most part, like I said, there was players, Stamkos, Paul, Vasilevskiy, those players, and there was other guys there. I'm not saying everyone mentally checked out, but there was a lot of players. It seemed like this team lost the step. They lost an edge that they had. Once they clinched that playoff spot, I'm not going to say they necessarily shut it down, but the intensity obviously was not there if you watched any of the games in March and then looked at a game in April. I mean, it's really Jekyll and Hyde situations there. And the thing that, there's really not a lot of positives to take from that playoff series other than, really, like I said, Stamkos, he played phenomenally. He really carried the Lightning in that series offensively. And when you look at how Vasilevskiy played in that series, the thing you could tip your cap to and kind of hold on to for next season, it is really that he ended on a high note. When you look at that playoff series, it was really him. It could have been so much worse, and I think that if we got a lesser version of him, it would have. And I'm talking about like complete blowouts, I think, in all 5 games. And even so, I don't think the series goes 5. I think that really, if you get a lesser version of how he played in those 5 games, the Lightning get swept. And that's really the fact of the matter there. If you're really going to sum up that series, without Vasilevskiy, this is an utter embarrassment. I mean, it was slightly embarrassing, but it could have been worse. In the 5 games, his goals against average was 3.22. His save percentage was .897. Putting that into perspective, he stopped 140 of 156 shots that he faced, which is insane to think about. That's a little over 30 a game and 30 saves. 30 shots. And that means obviously, and if you look at I don't even have to look at the stats for what the Lightning did that series because it's so etched in my memory, but the Lightning really didn't do much in return to help them out. I mean, the offense was really just, for the most part, the intensity was not there. And I mean, we don't have to go into all of that, but really what the overall point is here is that we saw something from him that we hadn't seen in quite a few seasons. I don't think we had seen it really since probably the 2021 season. Maybe you could even say 21-22. And then the Stanley Cup final against Colorado was just kind of, you could file that away because really everybody on the team was kind of just completely out of gas, and you're running into the best team in the league. And it was just not pretty. But the positive thing is that, like I said, we saw something from this guy that we have not seen in a couple of years. Now, do you attribute to that to he had more time off? You know, like I said, he had the first 2 months of the season off. That was really something that I think a lot of people may look to as the reason why, especially if he doesn't get off to a good start this year. But I think for me, it wasn't so much the kind of saves he was making. It was just, whenever I evaluate him or any goaltender for that matter, I just look at their body language. I just look at not necessarily the saves that they're making, but how they're making those saves and how they recover and their body language after that. And there was very few moments in that series against Florida where I didn't think that he was guessing out there. When he made a save, for the most part, he was very confident in his movements. He wasn't overreaching. I thought that, you know, the biggest issue I've always had for him, for the most part, was that really his ability when things are bad, where he kind of just overreaches and isn't able to get set up or rebound as quickly for secondary chances and third chances. And that was the thing that really stuck out to me, was that really there was pretty much every night, for the most part, win or lose, most times lose, he went out there with kind of, you could see it with the resolve, even if he didn't say it, that I'm going to have to try and do whatever I can to win this game for us. And I really thought in going into game 5 that we were going to see kind of that vintage playoff performance. We didn't get it. And what I mean by that is a shutout. And that's the thing, you know, when you look at Vasilevskiy in the playoffs, obviously I think, you know, a lot of people might look at what was his best year in the playoffs. It's probably 2021, won the Conn Smythe that year. And he had 5 shutouts that year. Obviously, we weren't going to get 5 shutouts. And especially with the way the Lightning were playing in front of him, it was not going to happen. But he played as well as well as anyone could have, with how terrible the Lightning were in front of him. And now the question remains, going into the summer and looking at what the Lightning will have to do or will attempt to do this summer in terms of putting a roster together and trying to roll out a competitive team for next season. You know, really just taking all the noise that is going on with Stamkos not being signed, and then kind of the worries that are behind that with Duclair. Is he coming back? All that offensive worry stuff. My main concern is with the defense being played in front of him. And I think that really, if he is going to be able to carry over how he played, because the way he played in that series, and I said it at the time against Florida, was that this is sustainable because it's not like he's making crazy saves. It's not like he's making behind the back glove saves. These are just regular saves that all the great goaltenders in the league make on a nightly basis, that you see Connor Hellebuck, Jake Ottinger, Bobrovsky. Those are the saves that you see normally from those guys making all the time. And really, quite frankly, saves that we hadn't seen Vasilevskiy make consistently in quite some time. So really, is he back is the real question. I think he is. And I really think that though, he could be back and he could be at the top of his form. But at the end of the day, if we don't see a good defense in front of him, it's really going to be all for naught. So really, it really depends, if the numbers are going to look right. It really is going to depend on what the Lightning do this summer. So let me know in the comments below how you feel. Is he back? I think he is. Is he going to win a Vezina? You know what? I might have to answer that question in September. When the dust has settled, I would assume everything would be done by then. So in terms of forming this roster, so let me know in the comments below. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about our expectations for next season for Andrei Vasilevskiy, as we always wrap things up with player reviews. But first, we're going to wrap things up with our last sponsor on today's show, and that is our friend over at FanDuel. Now, summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Final. You could bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you could use to bet everything from Stanley Cup Final MVP, Finals MVP in the NBA, which might end tonight. Who knows? Let's see if the Mavericks could hold off elimination, and who's going to hit one out of the park in the MLB. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So as always, I want to thank you all one last time for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. You can follow more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. And if you want to follow the show on social media, go ahead at LO_lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_lightning on Instagram. You could also give me a follow on Twitter at DankyDank, DENKY D8NK. So real quick, expectations for next season for Vasilevskiy. I want to see him play 50 games. I think that's a reasonable amount of games to get out of him. As the case is always and really has been the last couple of years, John Cooper's really going to have to figure out a happy medium on him. And I think that that 50 game number is pretty good. I think that's a good number of games to play him. Now, what's going to happen with the other 32 games? Do you put Jonas Johansson out there for all 32? Do you split that up with him and Tompkins? Does someone maybe else down from Syracuse, another goaltender, get brought up? Probably. We'll see. Anafelt went back to Europe, so who's going to be the other goaltender that might show up for the Lightning? Because I don't know if JoJo could really play that many games and be successful. I have faith that he can. It's more so that it's going to have to be situations that you put him in, maybe a lesser team. Maybe you don't roll him out there against the Florida Panthers. Maybe let him go up against a Utah or some other, maybe a San Jose, games like that. My only thing about when you talk about managing Vasilevskiy is, and I didn't like this last year, I thought he was too babied for the most part with this aspect, is I would like to see him play some back-to-backs this year, and I think he should. Off the top of my head, I don't believe that he played any back-to-back games last year. And I think that, if he's not, especially if he has 4 or 5 days off or whatever between games afterwards, I mean, what is the big issue? And if you want to give him off a little bit more, you could always put Johansson in that first game back from your mini break or your bye week or whatever you want to call it. But I think that's the thing. I think that you could manage him in an efficient way that you're not going to, especially if he's playing well, he's not going to come back fully cold. I think that if you want to play him, I think maybe start off the season, maybe let him play as many as possible, maybe just try and get him to play the first 2 months without really any rest. And then once you get like to December, closer to January, that's when you start giving Johansson starts here and there. As for wins, I think, if he's playing 50 games, the expectation is that he wins 30 of those. The goals against average, you would like to have that number around 2.5, quite honestly. It really kind of just depends on, what's going on in front of him, like I said, and I think that's really just how to kind of have to measure it with any goaltender, goals against average and save percentage. Connor Hellebuyck used to just dominate save percentages years ago because he literally had to stand on his head on a nightly basis in order to win games, and that's why he won the Vezina over Vasilevskiy a couple of years ago. That might be something that actually works in Vasilevskiy's favor this year if he is successful. That if he faces a lot of shots and his save percentage is there. His save percentage, I would like to see maybe like in the 915s, or the 910s around there. I think that's a good number for him. Save percentage, like I said, goals against average, maybe 2.5, 2.5, 2.6. I think that's fine. I think right now 2.21, which we saw as his lowest a couple of years ago in 2021. I just think that's unrealistic. I don't think the defense is enough, and I don't think he's back to where he could carry a team just yet. We might see little sparks of it this season, but I don't think we're going to see anything back to that form just yet. And I just expect him to make the saves that he is expected to make. And that's really all it is. And as long as he stays healthy and he plays the right way and takes care of the puck, we know he struggles for, I don't know why they even allow him to leave the net at times unless it's absolutely necessary. As long as he doesn't turn over the puck, which he does way too much when he's trying to clear the zone, I think he and the Lightning should be relatively fine in that regard. So let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on his season? Like I said, I gave him a B+ as his grade. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Braden Point, his player preview. We're going to do Vasilevskiy. We did Vasilevskiy. We're doing Point tomorrow. I would say we do Hedman, Kuch, and Stamkos, just because Stamkos is the big story right now. If he was signed and ready to go, we would probably end things with Kucherov just because of the season he had. So let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Vasilevskiy's season? Is he back? Will we see him continue the play that he had in the playoffs as well? So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.